Star fortresses are the most mysterious and mystical objects of the past civilization. Just a few years ago, no one was interested in these structures, but today, they have already been discussed by literally everyone. And it seems that the theme of the fortresses of the stars has subsided a little, but despite the huge number of statements, the point has not been put in the main question. What is it? A defensive structure? What do official historians insist on? Or are star forts a purely technical structure that used an unknown type of energy today or produced some unknown product? At first glance, the answer to this question is very simple. You just need to inspect the preserved star-shaped structures and draw some conclusions based on what you have seen. And here we are faced with a very big problem. Of course, there are a lot of star fortresses preserved, but almost all of them underwent major reconstructions in the last century. They were rebuilt as warehouses, barracks. Sometimes they were simply completed according to incomprehensible modern plans. Now, it is almost impossible to find an intact, preserved in its original form, the star fortress. There is another very significant problem too. These are people. These are those who have a real opportunity to inspect these structures. Most of the tourists take pictures of absolutely the wrong thing. They shoot beautiful views against the background of fortresses, but do not pay attention to important technical details. But it seems that today, we will be able to put an end to this issue. And you can decide for yourself. A defensive one is a structure designed to fire cannonballs at attacking troops, or it is a complex technical complex. And a blogger from Tiflis will help us in this. This unique man visited one of the best preserved fortresses of the stars. And most importantly, he understands what to look for and what to pay attention to. I will quote his story almost verbatim, because every little thing is important in this matter. Sometimes, things that personally seem insignificant to me can become the missing puzzle for another person to understand this complex system. Well, those who do not want to listen to my long retelling, you can just follow the link under the video and read everything yourself. The meaning of this will not change. So, let's get started. I was lucky enough to visit the star fort of Elvash, Portugal, in March of the 2016 year. But the time to post the photos came only 6 months later. Thanks to the natural ingenuity and perseverance of my gentle beloved Asu Quarry, we managed to get on an exclusive 3-hour tour of the star fort and visit the premises that are usually closed to visitors. Fort Elvash impresses with its size, complexity of structures, and safety. In the 2012 year, Fort was included in the UNESCO World Heritage Site, but perhaps it owes its safety most of all to the Portuguese dictator Salazar, who for many years used it to hold political prisoners. Officially, the fort is called Nossa Senhora das Fort, Fort of God's Grace, but in historical records, it is called Fort Conde de Lip, or simply de Lips, after the alleged builder, the German Marshal of English Linden. There is a lot of confusion with the history of the fort. Marshal Wilhelm Lipp himself is credited with the construction of at least one more fort on a bulk island, on the largest lake in northern Germany, 30 kilometers from the same Hanover, from where the dynasty of the famous grandfather, Wilhelm, came from. Fort is called Wilhelm. The state, named after Marshal Lipp, under the name of Fort Lippi. Another fort is also known in Germany, at the confluence of the Lippe and Rhine rivers, which has not survived to this day. When official historians claim that an English bastard of German blood allegedly built forts under the same name, from northern Germany to Portugal, vague doubts begin to torment me. The confusion in the forts continues to this day. For example, when searching for a plan of Fort Elvash, Google and Wiki insist on an old plan of the Linden Fort in Germany. To avoid another mess, I will call Fort de Grasse by the name of the town of Elvash, which he covers from the north. Elvash. a lost town on the border of Portugal and Spain. Elvash is not much remarkable, except for the marble quarries in the neighboring town of Estremonte, which grandiloquently calls the marble capital of Europe. About marble, or rather chalk in the water, the conversation is still ahead. The fort system of the city of Elvash is the largest in the world. The city itself is a star fort. But we will talk below only about the northernmost fort. It is marked on the map as Forte d'Agra, which is undoubtedly the star of Elvash in the literal and figurative sense. Delaying the intrigue and postponing the story about Fort itself, it is worth mentioning the huge aqueduct, the gifts of which must be passed on the way to Fort Elvash. The aqueduct describes a strange zigzag, in no way caused by the topology of the terrain. I'm skirting a very strange cemetery, where the builders of both the aqueduct and the fort itself most likely rest. It would be correct to call the builders Masons. Freemasons. Masonic symbols from this cemetery, comfortably located in the bend of the aqueduct, are presented in a variety of photos in Veronica's post-cemetery stories. The aqueduct leads to the citadel, which is spread out on a hill. The aqueduct is in direct view from the roof of Fort Elvash. The reference point in the photo is the highway, which passes right by the gift of the aqueduct. The self-aqueduct is protected by abandoned ravelins, the remains of one of which are visible in the photo. I was able to trace the path of the aqueduct inside the citadel. The arches of the aqueduct became the walls of houses, forming narrow winding alleys. The aqueduct ends somewhere near the central cathedral of Elvash, with an entrance in the form of a Roman portico, and a huge round recette over the entrance. Behind the central cathedral, there is an entrance to the city of Morev inside the citadel, surrounded by a second wall, built according to the classical, not bastion type. In the heart of the city of Morev, there is a castle, as usual with underground cisterns, the hatches in which are barred. From the walls of the Moor's castle, there is a magnificent view of the Fort Elvash, on the top of a neighboring hill, at a distance of a little more than a kilometer in a straight line. The emblem of Fort Elvash. Fans of conspiracy theory will be able to interpret the symbols on the emblem of the fort, above the main entrance in the southern ravelin, which faces the city of Elvash. A winged dragon, on a shield, wrapped with a chain with hooks. But I want to draw your attention to a small square section hole in a massive block, under the guns, just above the lion's head. Some fittings are still sticking out of one hole. There are many such openings around other doors throughout the fort. Their square cross-section surprises. Making a square hole is much more difficult than drilling a round one. The main entrance to the fort, for some reason, resembled an airlock, for example, in a balaclava. Pay attention to the similar square openings of the door leaf. The walls of the fort are very diverse in material and manufacturing technology. In some cases, the walls were clearly laid with later masonry. In the photo below is a photo from the outer wall of the fort, which shows the middle defensive belt and the central part. It can be seen that the brickwork is adjacent to the stone one, and the central part can be compared in elegance with some country house of a wealthy bourgeois. That's what the guides call this part. The governor's house, getting confused in the testimony, because there is a similar house of the same governor in the fort just south of Elvash. And if you look at Fort Wilhelmstein in northern Germany, which I wrote about in the first part, it becomes clear that the governor, in addition to two houses in the forts around Elvash, also had a dacha a couple of thousand kilometers away, built according to the same project. The outer contour of the walls is built mostly of thin brick and has a fairly regular structure. Opening, arch, opening. A lot of openings are laid. Professional guides explain the large number of openings by a psychological factor, so that the attackers are afraid of a huge number of hospitals, assuming that the muzzle of a cannon will stick out of each one. When asked why arches were needed in the outer contour of the walls, and why they were laid, the guide could not find what to answer. I'm also at a loss to guess why build an arch and then lay it. Does the arch increase the structural strength in this way? Or the outer wall was not defensive in the traditional sense at all? I have little idea how it was possible to defend with such huge holes in the outer wall laid down to date. It was possible to approach these holes freely from the outside, well, slightly out of breath from climbing the hill. On the other hand, it is extremely difficult to push the muzzle of a gun through such openings. The stairs are not designed for this. The steps will not allow the guns to hit directly at the enemy coming from below. Cannon fire with a canopy, in such a disposition, is ineffective because of the dead zone directly in front of the outer wall. And the angle of rotation of the gun horizontally is also extremely small. The contour of the outer wall stretches for several kilometers and is a fairly wide passage. Occasionally the passage is blocked by arches. It's easy enough to approach the outer walls. Only a more or less steep rise of the hill separates from the hypothetical enemy. There is no moat, except for traps in the form of wolf pits, which I will show below. The terrible and secret weapon of the defenders in the fort were the wolf pits, located in rows in several places on the approach to the outer wall. The guide's explanation: the approaches were made specially so easy to attack in order to deceive the enemy and force him to attack exactly in those places where the wolf pits are located. The wolf pits are not located along the entire contour, but only from its most gentle northern part. This is what they look like today. And before there was a sharp wooden stake inside. 3 rows of wolf pits, behind them a poorly protected outer wall. Such primitivism contrasts vividly with the scale of the technical solution of the fort itself. However, I do not find a reasonable explanation for what such holes could be used for. The guide also mentioned that the pits are connected by a complex system of underground passages. However, it is not clear how this correlates with the presence of sharp stakes in them. In the photo below, there is a brick exterior wall with partially laid openings and a steep ramp for cannons. From the inside, the space in front of the wall is well shot through, but, in some places, there is enough space and defensive structures to hide from the fire of the defenders of the fort. It is unclear why this was done. The outer wall breaks off steeply towards a wide moat, separating the outer contour from the middle defensive contour. But in some places, the outer wall allows you to descend comfortably. Almost under the entire outer wall, there is a battle course of complex construction. The photo shows one of the entrances to this combat move behind a black grille, as well as a number of narrow vertical hospitals along the bottom of the wall. The moat between the outer and middle contours is a spacious lawn. The guides claim that part of the moat in front of the main entrance to the middle contour was filled with water only for decorative purposes. The second contour rises with impregnable walls, an order of magnitude more impressive than the walls of the outer contour. Despite the inaccessibility of the middle contour, embedded arches can be seen in its walls, the purpose of which is not clear. In one place of the moat between the outer and middle contours, our attention was attracted by a construction, the purpose of which they could not explain to us. It looked like an underground cistern, covered with a lid. On the impregnable wall behind this cistern, there are several large and small laid arches. Pay attention to the small square modern hatch in front of the huge round hatch of the tank. There's clearly something underground that doesn't quite fit into my ideas about defensive ditches. Despite our exclusive tour, we were not shown this hatch in more detail and did not even put forward any explanation of what it could be. Pay attention to the laid arches in the impregnable wall. They are clearly connected to this hatch. Maybe eggs. I do not know how to properly name these extremely strange holes in my opinion. They are very weak, they resemble an embrasure, and the purpose is completely unclear to me. I saw the same eggs on an old engraving of a fort in northern Germany, from the last post. In other words, eggs are not fantasies of Portuguese Freemasons, but some kind of structural element, the functioning of which is not clear to me. Maybe one of the readers will guess. On the other hand, what good fellows even built a ladder with a door to make it easier to storm the impregnable walls? And the eggs are probably the germ of modern art that I don't understand. The second pair of eggs with a ladder shyly hiding in the crowns of olive trees. Basically, all the eggs in Fort Elvash are through holes in the walls with a thickness of 1.5 meters or more. Well, there was an egg laid on the reverse side. I would have thought that these egg-shaped holes were designed to shoot something like grape shot, which flies in a wide fan and hits the enemy's manpower. But the eggs are also located on the side of the buildings of the outer contour and are directed towards the middle contour. How to explain this direction of the hole? And its location is at a level above the upper door jamb. Pay attention to the height at which this hole is located. It is easy to compare it with the height of the doorway and windows. Think about it for a minute. If you hadn't read the description, but would have seen only this photo, would you have been able to guess that in front of you is a defensive structure facing the defenders and not, say, some medieval bakery of a strange design? Almost under the entire contour of the outer wall, there is a so-called battle passage, which opens with loopholes towards the moat and the middle contour. In the photo below, you can see the outer wall, ending almost vertically, level, and a number of loopholes of the combat course. In the distance, you can see a building that I called a crematorium, with a huge megaphone at a level just above the entrance door. The horn is not visible from this angle, and a well-visible row of ventilation holes on the roof. The battle course itself is a long vaulted corridor. It's quite booming, apparently because of the vaulted ceiling. The walls are mostly freshly whitewashed, but in some places the brickwork of the vaulted ceiling is visible. The length of the combat course is several kilometers. To be honest, I'm sick of walking on it. The passage is located approximately on the same level. Only in a few places there was a small, barely noticeable gentle rise. The battle course is divided into segments, each of which is approximately 100 to 200 meters long. At the end of each segment, there is a partition with 3 loopholes, blocking the combat course. It is somewhat similar to the compartments and bulkheads of, say, a submarine. The loss of one compartment does not lead to the loss of the entire combat move. Each partition has a side U-shaped passage. This passage allows you to bypass the partition and get into the next segment of the combat move compartment. The thickness of the partition can be estimated from this photo. The thickness of the outer wall of the battle passage can also be estimated from a photograph of the hospital leading into the moat. Between the outer and middle contours, these loopholes have the shape of a truncated prism. I narrow down quite noticeably towards the outside. Loopholes in no way block the entire moat with their view, leaving many blind spots. For combat, in my opinion, such holes are practically unsuitable. Shoals of U-shaped transitions attracted special attention. There are no doors as such in them, but in each there are such square or round holes, similar to the holes above the main entrance to Fort. In the photo below, one of these holes is in the jamb of the U-shaped passage at a height of about eye level. I have to duck. In the distance, you can see the bright rectangle of one of the hospitals going out into the grove. If you look closely to the right of this hospital, 3 loopholes partitions are barely visible. I don't know, maybe this is Salazar's legacy, when Fort was used as a prison. But what's the point of making square holes like in the photo below, and there are a lot of them in the door jambs? I can't get rid of the feeling that some equipment was attached, perhaps for hermetically closing the U-shaped passages. We are still walking along the outer contour of the fort, and it's time to move on to the middle contour. But there are still interesting points that I don't want to omit. The outer wall has at least one secret passage located on the northwestern side, which, according to the guides, were used to run to the spring outside the walls of the fort. Today, the entrance to it is visible even on satellite maps. Such an entrance can hardly be called secret. The entrance to the secret passage is very uncomfortable and narrow, slightly wider than the shoulders. The entrance itself is located at the top of the outer wall. The purpose of this arrangement of the entrance is not very clear, but we will write it off as defensive tactics. The secret passage itself is a steeply inclined tunnel with stairs located on two sides and deep gutters in the middle. There are numerous niches on the sides, the purpose of which is not clear. Perhaps it was the passages that are now laid. The lower platform of the passage is a small vaulted room. For some reason, it seems to me that the contours of the pool are being overlooked, which were unnecessarily leveled with the floor level. On the sides of the lower level platform, there are arches with niches of unknown purpose. It is quite possible that these arches hid the passage somewhere further. The central deep trough is quite remarkable. Its purpose is completely unclear. It remains to speculate. Neither for defense, nor for carrying water in buckets up the ford, it is not needed and only makes it difficult to move. But there is a gutter, and perhaps earlier there was a pipe or other equipment located in it. And at the top of the photo, it is clearly visible that the well passes through to the upper level of the outer wall. Perhaps dear readers will tell you what this move could be intended for. Personally, he reminded me of one structure that is much more famous than Fort Elvash. Judge for yourself how similar it is. Lukvik Observatory, Samarkand. In some places of the battle course, there are strange kind of stools. A trained eye will surely notice that the stool is in a walled-up niche. The niche faces the outside of the fort. The niche behind the next such stool turned out to be broken at about waist level. The stool turned out to be an uncomfortable ladder, and behind the bars there was a passage down somewhere. To my delight, our excursion was allowed to open the grate and go down the brick-lined corridor. Brick arches of the tunnel going down and out from the fort. The corridor went steeply enough, about 8 to 10 meters deep. Unfortunately, most of the corridors are filled in, and the guides complained that they could not get equipment for ultrasound scanning thicker than the ground. Of course, the guides had a ready-made simple explanation of what the tunnels were for. To listen if there is a tunnel under the walls of the fort. The end of the first tunnel was flooded with groundwater. Unfortunately, in the crush, do not pay attention to the fittings that stick out of the wall on the right. In other lighting, you can see how the transparent water glitters. It is also noticeable that the corridor turns into a horizontal platform. We were also shown a second tunnel that had been opened. It feels like it lies at exactly the same depth, but unlike the first one, it is filled in and not flooded with water. The horizontal platform of the tunnel is clearly visible, but it is not clear whether it leads even deeper. It is clearly visible that side corridors depart from the horizontal platform. They are also filled in. Not knowing if the corridors connected to each other, but it would be logical to assume such a network of underground corridors. Approximately in the middle of the underground tunnel, there are arches, which could well be the beginning of side branches. Now these arches are filled in, and it is clear that they are trying to dig them out. In the second tunnel, it was also possible to photograph a side branch at the middle level. Its soils are clearly visible here. It seems to me that if the rock had collapsed, there would not have been such relatively clear layers. Such layers seem to be washed with water. Underground tunnels run perpendicular to the combat course. The exits from the underground tunnels rest directly on the passages from the side passages to the inner rob. One of these exits is shown in the photo below. Pay attention to the square modern hatch, which clearly leads to some modern communications. There is an evacuation plan near the entrance, which is much better than any plans of Fort Elvash, which are not so many on the internet. This plan is exactly a piece of the fort with the previous photo. From the upper left part, there is a steep bend of the combat course, from which the staircase of the underground tunnel radially departs to the bend, ending at the edges of the plan. It seems important to me that the tip of the pedal of the star fort is directed directly at the entrances to the tunnel and the combat departure. On the plan, this pedal is indicated very schematically. Definitely, the underground part of the fort is equivalent to the above-ground part, and maybe even more important. Few researchers paid attention to the underground part of the star forts. Previous posts were about the outer contours of Elvash's star fort, the system of passages, the moat and the outer walls of the middle contour. The middle contour itself actually forms a four-petaled star. It is clearly visible in the photo at the beginning of the post. The middle contour is separated from the central part by a small space that cannot be called a moat, but rather an inner enclosed courtyard. The entrance to the middle contour is a vaulted, not long, inclined passage with the second and third gates, located saucily with the main entrance on one side and with the entrance to the central part of the fort on the other. In my opinion, working with sound waves was the main purpose of the fort's middle belt. For a better understanding, I will give a diagram of a part of the middle belt from the fire safety plate. I put purple color on the diagram of the numbers that I will refer to, so that the relationship of the elements of the middle part is clear. The middle contour can be accessed through several small doors number 12 next to the horns, in the form of oval eggs number 13 and 14, which I wrote about in previous parts, or through the main entrance number 5, reinforced with a drawbridge connecting to the ravelin of the outer contour. The bridge practically does not shoot through the loopholes in the walls, exactly as through the upper loopholes on the sides of the decorative figures of angels. The upper loopholes are simply not able to conduct targeted fire throughout the bridge due to blind spots, an extremely unfortunate decision for defense if someone else considers the star as a defensive fort. Judge for yourself. Here is a photo of the hospital firm inside the middle contour. It is directed quite steeply downwards, outward, to a depth of about 1.5 meters, not allowing at least some targeted shooting on the bridge. Starting at chest level, the loophole descends to the level of the floor base. The guides claim that the moat in front of the entrance was filled with water to a depth of about a couple of dozen centimeters, ostensibly for beauty, since even the guides understand that knee-deep water cannot serve as any serious obstacle. The hospitals of the middle contour go down quite sharply and once rested on the water surface of the moat. It is also worth noting the strong echo of the corridors of the middle contour. Hospitals seem to be a kind of pickups of a standing resonant wave inside the middle contour and directed sound through the slots of hospitals to the reflecting surface of the water. Also pay attention to the strange brickwork behind the angel in armor. It can be seen that the masonry forms a kind of trapezoidal and triangular cells, now laid with stones on a bonding solution. I have seen similar cells in other Portuguese forts. The cells in some places are completely laid down, in some places they are simply littered with garbage and stones without mortar. In some places they are completely empty. Satellite images clearly show such a cellular structure of the ravelin. This structure is very similar to waveguides in the section. Pay attention to the border of the shadow from the curtain. It is clearly visible that now there are only 3 loopholes in the middle, and along the edges are not laid, but in fact the structure of the upper part of the curtain is much more complicated. Let's go back to the main entrance to the middle contour to show another interesting element. This is supposedly an opening for lowering the grate covering the entrance. Maybe so, but why diamond-shaped? How they were carved, poured, drilled into the stones forming the arch. The main entrance itself is a staircase and leads from the drawbridge to the entrance stairs in the central part of the Star Fort, the so-called governor's house. 3 small holes of unknown purpose are clearly visible in the outer door of the main entrance. The main entrance is facing the drawbridge. A huge hole dominating the photo, of course, to pour hot oil on the heads of hapless attackers. This hole is in the plane of even more huge holes in the central part, but it is not saucy with them. Under the huge round hole is the same arch with diamond-shaped holes for the alleged lattice. In the depth of the photo, a barred door is visible, leading to an echoing side corridor with the already described inclined loopholes. Symmetrical corridor 11. Round chambers are located on the sides of the main entrance, and sharply asymmetrically in height, despite the rather strict symmetry of the entire giant fort structure. In the middle contour, we happen to see 3 round chambers, 2 of which are more correctly called toroidal. All of them are located at different heights, asymmetrically to each other, and undoubtedly form a kind of system, like a huge wind instrument. Perhaps there are even more other cameras, but we had a chance to visit only two officially, and another one separated for a short time from the main tour. The lowest of the three chambers looks like a toroid with a central column and blindside niches. The camera opens with its only door into an echoing corridor with loopholes. The camera is located several steps below the level of the corridor and, accordingly, below the level of the bridge. The uppermost of the three chambers is also a toroid, but unlike the lower one, there is a bourgeois in one of the side niches, and in the other niche, there is an external window, currently tightly closed with brown shutters. In the white vaults of the ceiling, as well as in the lower chamber, a small rectangular hole is visible. Photo of a bourgeoisie in a small round niche of the upper pyramidal chamber. It turned out to be a little smudged. I'm not at all sure that the stove has always stood here, but there is no doubt that there is a chimney hole somewhere up from this niche. Note that the design of this niche is fractally similar to a smaller copy of the camera itself. But behind these shutters, there is a round opening into the courtyard between the middle contour and the central part, at about point number 6. A similar hole number 8, but leading to a different depth, is in the middle of the three chambers. And in my opinion, the holes 6 and 8 served as a sound waveguide. The average round chamber differs from the other two in that it does not have a column in the middle, but only one large vault. This is the largest camera, accommodating quite a lot of people. The guide in the middle tells about the features of acoustics in this room. Allegedly, the head of the fort became in the center, and the officers along the perimeter, approximately under the ledges where the light bulbs are located. They could hear the elder perfectly. I will leave this fantasy on the conscience of the guide, but I emphasize that even official sources confirm the special acoustics of the cameras. If there are several steps leading up to the topmost of the three chambers, then a ladder descends to the middle one, according to the height of which it is possible to estimate the height difference of the two chambers. A staircase leads to the niche of the main entrance, to the level of the upper chambers. Also pay attention to the niche to the left of the stairs. This is the same waveguide number 8, similar to the previous one, but larger in size, including due to the difference in the levels of the cameras themselves. And here is the waveguide number 8 itself, facing the courtyard between the middle contour and the central part. Apparently they decided not to seal it up, although a rectangular frame was inserted into the round hole. Experts will probably confirm that the design is very similar to the design of a waveguide, for example a microwave oven. The acoustics features and other characteristic features of the cameras allow us to assume that the cameras served for one or another sound processing as a giant macro circuit and were connected to waveguides or, if you like, auditory openings. I tried to capture with the lens of the soap dish both openings of waveguides 6 and 8 leading, respectively, to the second and vaulted round chamber number 9, located at different levels in height, although the openings of the waveguides themselves are located symmetrically relative to the entrance to the middle contour. If you look closely, then in the shadow just below the door leaf, and just above the gray-haired man with his hands folded on the back, there is a third hole above the arch with diamond-shaped holes, which we have already considered above. Pay attention to the stone-lined star in front of the entrance. If we now stand in this cobblestone star in front of the entrance and turn around 180 degrees to see where all these waveguides number 6, 8, and 3 are directed, then we will see the bulk of the central part, with an egg-shaped hole above the entrance, exactly in the plane of symmetry of the fort and its entrance. I cannot call this hole a horn, because unlike other egg-shaped holes that I have already cited in other parts, there is no pronounced conical bell. From this huge egg-shaped hole, there is a view of the middle contour, where the batteries were supposedly located. Rectangular holes in the walls are visible. Right below is the main entrance. To my great regret, the tour did not include other rooms of the middle contour. I suppose there's still a lot of interesting stuff there. I managed to run only along the upper part of the middle contour of literally gallops in that short time, while the others were crowding at the entrance. Let me remind you, the tour lasted only 3 hours, and I am describing the impression for the third week. Below is only one photo of me, the other two are dug up on the internet and belong to the time before the recent restoration. A narrow circular courtyard between the middle contour and the central part. On top of the wall, there are supposedly hospitals' batteries. On each of the 4 petals of the star, there were, apparently, living quarters for service personnel. I didn't have time to see anything special in them, but the premises were hardly originally conceived as residential. In the middle of the photo, there is an axis of symmetry of the petal, resting on an extremely tight booth on the tip of the petal. This axis of symmetry continues at another level with the underground passage discussed in the previous post. In this light, a number of hatches of unknown purpose are also clearly visible in the photo, somehow communicating with the interior of the middle contour. Well, I'll finish about the middle contour with another photo of the courtyard located on the reverse side of the central part, with a similar hole and a very similar entrance. Only in the front part, there are no stairs. Instead of them, there is a hole of waveguides. By the way, if you look into this egg from the outside, you will see another egg through the central part. In the 2 weeks that I have been describing Elvash's star Fort, it has become almost my own. Fort is beautiful in its own way, like any creation, in which a lot of purposeful efforts are invested. Today, you will find some more amazing things in my opinion. The central part of the fort is called the governor's house, apparently because of the sharp difference in the architectural style of the house in the very center of the star, from the rest of the array of buildings. Elvash was not any governor's center, and no one would have thought of defending the governor of a town with 16,000 inhabitants in this way. On the other hand, it is clearly visible that the central part is an excellent target if the enemy artillery ever intended to besiege the fort. This design of a tall structure in the center of the fort is rather a typical solution for many star fortresses, and not the exception of Elvash. In the first part, I have already shown an engraving of a fort in northern Germany with a high bell tower in the very center. I will give an example of the spire of the Peter and Paul fortress. According to the official version, the construction of the Peter and Paul star in St. Petersburg began with the construction of the cathedral of the same name, whose spire has long been the highest mark in the northern capital. The Smolensk Cathedral is precisely directed at the spire of the Peter and Paul Cathedral inside the Star Fortress, from the other bank of the Neva, and the Peter and Paul Cathedral itself, together with the star, is oriented exactly to the victim of the island volcano Fuerteventura in the Canary Islands. Let's go back to Fort Elvash and the photos, which are clickable as usual. Below is a plan of the central part from the fire stand. I have marked with purple numbers those places on the plan that I will refer to with numbers in parentheses for your convenience. Kelvin's Ives. I won't say that we are such friends with Pro Vladimir, but some of his ideas and findings greatly influenced me. And so, having climbed the pane chandelier of the central part of Fort Elvash, despite the stunning views, I remembered such colleagues with their predilection for iron sticking out of the walls. In the photo, in my opinion, the remains of a device that worked on the principle of a Kelvin dropper. In principle, her work dripping drops of water flying through primitive bookcases, like this device in the photo, are able to generate a sufficiently large electric discharge, measured in kilos or even megavolts. The useful power of such droppers is not enough to perform the work directly, but the generated charge can be accumulated in the battery. Pay attention to the fact that the upper 3 grooves of the dropper form an inverse ladder, that is, drops from the upper groove fly past the lower ones. The lowest ledge differs from the top 3. Pay attention also to the double iron hook at the bottom of the droppers. What was suspended there? Certainly not pots of flowers. Right under the hook, there is a round hole, of which there are many in the fort. This hole is centered strictly along the plane of symmetry of the petal of the star, in the same plane with underground passages leading deep underground, under the outer contour of the star. The dropper is located as if in a mini courtyard number 1. On the side of the central part, according to the flat symmetry of the petal of the star and the dropper, there is one of 8 huge holes in the lower stone base and a smaller hole on the topmost tier under the tiled roof. On the left side of the photo, there is a view of a row of loopholes, allegedly for guns. I want to emphasize once again that we did not see a single cannon or its traces on the territory of the fort. The hole in the central part opposite the droppers is barred, unlike other holes. Under the large oval window, there is a large arch leading as if to nowhere. Behind this arch, inside, there is a fairly large room number 8 with a strange round compartment. Unfortunately, we could not get into this room. And at the level below, there is an oval window bell, approximately coaxially, with a round window for droppers. The lower bell-shaped window is directed to the corner number 10, created by 2 buildings with arches. Inside the corner, there are 2 men in the photo. But let's return to the central part of the fort itself. The central part has many levels with various shaped rooms, but the tour was limited to only some of them. The first level opens literally on all 4 sides, in the form of a cross, formed by 4 entrances. I have already shown the southern and northern entrances in previous posts. Below are photos of another one, I don't remember eastern or western. Note the 2 oval holes, and the 3 prongs above the top hole. What kind of attachments were attached to these teeth, and how it interacted with the holes and the entrance. The east-west corridor is freely visible through and through. There are a pair of oval holes above each entrance. The lower opening opens directly into the corridors from all 4 sides. The upper opening is located on another level, just above the corridor. One of the corridors facing south towards the main entrance number 1 differs from the others in that it has an internal church. Its ceiling is decorated differently than the rest of the corridors. In the niches of the church, the old painting, which has no religious content, has been preserved, as well as the entire interior decoration. 4 corridors converge in the center, in the form of a domed charola, which with its 4 holes opens to the next level. The photo below is actually taken from such a round hole. This is what the dome of the ball looks like from below. All 4 round holes are through. Let me remind you that officially this place is called the dining room. On the sides of the passage to the first level, narrow hospitals are mirrored to the left and right. It seems that the muzzle of muskets was thrust into them and valiantly held the last line of defense. But I was interested in the internal structure. The other side of the hospital was hidden behind a closed door of a small arch of the corridor, almost immediately behind the entrance. Luckily for us, the door was unlocked. On the plan, a brown door with a photo is marked near the number 5, and there are at least 6 such doors. The plan shows that the loophole hole creates such unimaginable somersaults that its use for firing should be completely rejected. First of all, the space behind the door is laid down to chest level, and the lower edge of the inside of the hospital, which at least makes it difficult to access an already narrow space. Even if we assume that a fighter of ammunition and a cocked hat will climb inside, then he will have to fit in an extremely uncomfortable vertical faceted pencil case. The opening of the hospital itself goes steeply down and to the side, which is clearly visible by the black stripe. A fighter would have to use a musket with a curved arc muzzle and twist the letter IZ himself to stick out a weapon at the hospital, which would still be aimed at a cobblestone in a narrow patch in front of the wall, somewhere between the exit sign and the trash cans from the top photo. From such a position, it would be possible to shoot an enemy smoking near a garbage can, and even then, if he leaned his back against the right hospital. Let me remind you that the passage through the open space from the middle contour to the entrance to the central part, is 6 to 8 meters and is not visible from the hospital in any way. It shows only the lower part of the torso of onlookers who walk in a circle around the central part of the fort. We managed to visit the first of the underground levels after all. But since the dear reader, in an incomprehensible way for me, has had the patience to finish reading to the 6th part, then I will use his patience and finish with the upper levels first, so that I can finally tell about the tank. Central part, 2nd level. Above the high corridors of the 1st level, there are low, seemingly service passages of the 2nd level, with locked side doors. They look more like tunnels to me. The corridors on the 2nd level are again through, and on the one hand open outwards with the same eggs that I have repeatedly shown. On the other side, the corridors of the 2nd level converge with round portholes to the dome of the 1st level ball, directly above the dining room. In the photo below, I tried to show at the same time that the passage is viewed through to the egg and what the hole looks like from the side. In my opinion, the 2nd level served as a kind of distributor waveguide of flows from the central part, on different sides of the fort, through all 8 oval holes in the vertices and on the sides of the square of the central part. The 3rd level opened with an unexpected exit outside, onto a spacious red platform, with a yellow and white like a toy tarum, built in a completely different style, not in harmony with the rest of the fort in any way. I, apparently enchanted by the romantic atmosphere of the prospects and the view of the Kelvin drip, forgot to take pictures of the 3rd level from the outside, using photos from the internet of the times before the recent restoration of the fort. There are undeniable advantages in old photos before restoration. They have a lot of details removed unknowingly, or most likely for aesthetic reasons by restorers. Here, for example, not only hooks sticking out of the walls are clearly visible, but also chains hanging from somewhere from the upper level. Chains, hooks. And what did they do in the Teremka? We did not see any rooms resembling bedrooms in this Teremka. In general, the room does not look like a residential one in any way. This is the same part that I captured after the restoration. But, even in this state, she does not leave the thought that someone could have lived here for any length of time. The hardware and walls are in place, but the chains are no longer there. As always, I draw your attention to the round hole, which are exactly oriented to all 4 petals of the star of the fort. The device of the office on the 3rd level essentially repeats the device of the central ball, which occupies the 1st and 2nd levels. And besides, they exactly coincide with their axis and are oriented to the sides. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that Shirova also matches its size, but in any case, they are very close. To look into these round windows, I had to climb to the top 4th level of the central part. This is the highest point of the fort, and the entire neighborhood, for many tens of kilometers. There are 4 oval windows facing this level, one of which we have already seen from the Kelvin drip side. There are shell-shaped holes between the windows. The hole in the approximation looks through, but it was not possible to establish exactly where it leads. The other holes were sealed shut. If you look through the window, you can clearly see the rings in which chains were once suspended. What was suspended from those chains is unknown. And now, from the highest point of the 4th level of the central part of the fort, we will descend to minus the 1st level. The tank. In the historical descriptions of Fort Elvash, it is said that the water there, to put it mildly, is not very suitable for drinking. The reason for the unsuitability of water for drinking is not specified, but it is obvious. There is a large amount of dissolved calcium hydroxide in the turbid whitish water. This is the so-called lime water, closely related by its origin to the richest deposits of marble in the district. Lime water is a strong alkali or alkali electrolyte, which gave its Arabic Latin name to the commonly used alkaline batteries. The finger alkaline batteries use a material impregnated with the same lime water that oozes out of the ground in Fort Elvash. The entrance to the cistern is directly from the northern corridor of the first level of the central part of the fort. This is what the ladder from the cistern looks like. The depth of the tank can be estimated from this photo, about a dozen meters. At the moment, the tank is almost dried up, except for a couple of places where water is still visible. They will be in the photos below. The level of lime water in the cistern was imprinted on the walls. A pillar is installed right in the middle of the tank, which is completely unnecessary from a constructive point of view, since the arches are strong enough to withstand the overlap of one floor, and directly under the pillar, there is an empty bowl of the first level. It may not be clear from the photo, but the tank repeats its design of the ball first and third levels, with the exception of the pillar installed in the middle. On the four sides of the pillar, at the top of the arches, are the same familiar holes of unknown purpose. The pillar is mounted on a brick base, where the bricks are placed vertically. Such a brick strip can be traced along the base of all the walls. The pillar is made of rough blocks, and is very possibly hollow inside. Vast chambers like this one radiate from the central pillar in four directions. At the top point of the chamber, there is a hole from which some liquid oozes. The side chambers are interconnected by narrow side passages that form a second ring around the central chamber with a pillar. In some places, there are depressions near the wall of the cistern, in which cloudy lime water is visible. In this photo, the color of the water, which is absolutely unsuitable for drinking, is slightly better visible. This recess with water is located under a forked staircase. A similar staircase, forked in the middle with a chute, has already been met in a secret passage. Lime water reacts with carbon dioxide to form a cloudy mixture. I discard the assumption that drinking water supplies were stored in the tank immediately, since water with a high concentration of alkali. Here is a simplified device of a battery, with a light bulb connected to it. The main elements of the battery are the central rod. The walls are covered with a layer of metal. The electrolyte is poured into the space between the central rod and the walls. Compare with the structure of the fort's cistern. Just add the alkylist to the desired level. All of these elements of the battery's internal structure, with the exception of the metal layer along the walls, are present in the tank, making it quite plausible that the tank is a battery of gigantic size. And indeed, the central rod is present in the form of a huge central pillar. The remnants of the strongest electrolyte of natural origin are still oozing from the floor. There is no metal on the walls. However, the strange patterns left on the walls allow me to make the assumption that the sheet metal in the form of sheathing fits snugly to the walls for a long time. For the power generated by the battery, the surface area of the metal is important, which may explain why side passages are needed. Well, that's it. I have fully credited you with an almost scientific report on a visit by a blogger from Tiflis to the most interesting preserved fortress of the star. So write everything you think about it in the comments and decide for yourself whether it is a defensive structure or a technological one. That's it. Watch my channel.